Every Night is Game Night, episode 49, Gen Con Hotness, and Sword and Sorcery. Hey everybody, welcome back to Every Night is Game Night. This is episode 49, back from Gen Con. This is Anthony along with Jason.
I am not back from Gen Con, but yo, my peoples, what's up?
They don't have to know that.
Well, they can probably hear it in your voice. You're like beleaguered and bleary.
Yeah. If you guys listen to the other podcast, BGA, you'll know that we recorded that Monday morning after Gen Con. And so Chris and I did not sound our normally chipper selves. And keep in mind, our normally chipper selves record at 10 o'clock at night. So that's how tired we were. But yeah, Gen Con's awesome. So it's going to wear you out. Anything awesome should wear you out, right?
Yeah. So what'd you play? Well, so, I mean, we're going to do... I shouldn't set you up like that. But we are going to do some Gen Con reviews, maybe in a couple episodes when we actually sit down and get through some of the new stuff. But was there like a thing or two solo play-wise that jumped out at you?
Yeah. I mean, I know you sent me a list, and I have my own list going in of games that we knew were soloable that would be hot at Gen Con. I think like I look through your list and then my own, and like a good 60% were sold out. So that shows you whether or not it was the theme, like a game like Scott Pilgrim, which sold out in like an hour, or it was just, a hot game like Hot Shots or Spirit Island. Lots and lots of games sold out. Gen Con was crazy. Walking around on Sunday, everything was like half empty. But I was able to bring home a handful of games that I'm excited to play that are soloable. Spirit Island being one of them. Summit is another one from Inside Up, which is this mountain climbing game with multiple different modes and multiple different options. I'm definitely excited about that one. And Dragonfire is another one. This is the D&D reskin of Shadowrun Crossfire, which was out of print for a while. So we talked with Kevin back in January about this game and his evangelism of it. So I guess that convinced me to pick it up, even though I didn't like Shadowrun Crossfire very much.
Give it another chance.
Yeah, I'm telling you, if you haven't been to Gen Con, be careful. Like, bring cash only, hide your cards, have a budget, because you lose all sense of reasonable thinking once you get there. You're like, I have money! Games!
Twilight Imperium, come!
Oh, yeah.
So we will definitely get to all those titles in a couple of weeks. But we're guarantee we're going to have an episode with Spirit Island, with Summit, with some of the other recent releases. So you guys sit tight for that. Give us a couple of weeks to settle in. Yeah,
for sure. Like, I've been home for 2 days. I've played nothing. I've popped open maybe 4 games just to start punching, because that's always fun. But I will have played something by then. So we'll get through some of these.
Cool. All right. So this episode is going to be a little bit unique. So while Anthony was at Gen Con, I actually recorded an episode about Sword and Sorcery, which is a game that came out to a little bit before Gen Con, especially to Kickstarter backers. Wanted to talk about it with somebody, though. So I went into the One Player Guild, and a good friend of ours, Byron, you'll hear his story when we fire up the episode. So we are going to attach that conversation to the end of this episode. But before we get to that, Anthony has a couple of special announcements, particular to BGA and ENGN. Go for it, buddy.
All right, guys. So obviously been growing a lot. We have ENGN. It's been coming up on 50 episodes next week, and we're very excited about that. BGA has been around now for almost exactly 4 years. So here in a week or two, you can catch our 4-year anniversary episode. And as everything has grown, we wanted to upgrade everything. So you'll notice that on the BGA side of things, we recently upgraded the logo, we swapped out all of our imagery and everything, and completely overhauled the website. So it's a brand new website at boardgamersanonymous.com. We now have a very easy to navigate, hopefully, setup where Every Night is Game Night has its own channel. The BGA podcast has its own channel. All the reviews are in their own channel. Kickstarter information's in its own channel. So you can get in there, find the stuff you're looking for, or, poke around and find some other cool stuff. So that was something very excited to get that up, and working on that for a long time. So if you have not checked out the website before, if you have not read any of our reviews, which there's plenty of those up there, or checked out some of the Kickstarter coverage or any of the preview episodes we do here on ENGN, definitely check that out. part of that, though, to celebrate that, of course, is we wanted to run a contest. So this contest has been going for about a week and a half now. If you follow BGA in any form, you might have seen some of the posts. I've been posting stuff pretty frequently. But you can go to boardgamersanonymous.com or click the link in the show notes for this episode, and you can join up, enter our contest in one of, I think there's 11 different ways to do it. So what's going to happen is on September 1st, the contest will end. We're going to pick 3 winners, and each of those people is going to win $50 to buy whatever they want. So we're not going to put upon you any certain games. You will be able to go and purchase as you please from Amazon or cool stuff. The contest can be entered every day. So you can do the initial 11, or and then you can go on there every day and continue to enter. And if you've already followed us on Facebook or Twitter or any of the other places, all you have to do is go enter, and those things will automatically populate. So don't feel like you've been left out, but you do have to go to the contest and sign up. It's not automatic unless you go in there and do it. So make sure you do that. You have about a week or so left from when this episode goes up before we shut it down, and we'll announce the winners after that. So make sure to hop on over to do that. Yeah, so that's boardgamersanonymous.com. Check out the contest. All new content there. Every night is game night. It has its own channel now, so you don't have to hunt and peck to find those episodes. Very, very excited about it.
Yeah, man, we look better than ever. And it's really awesome. That's a lot of hard work by you, man. So that's great.
Yeah, no, thanks. Appreciate it. It's just, I want to make sure people can find stuff. I think there was a time when I was trying to find an episode myself or an old review, and I clicked through like 6 or 7 times. I'm like, that's not good. I put everything here. So let's make it a little easier for people to find things. So we'll have a lot of new stuff coming up here in the next few months as we kind of build that out. So keep an eye out.
I also wanted to thank the guy who designed our logos. So the BGA has a new logo. ENGN, we rebranded a couple of months ago with a logo. The designer's name is Michael Rankin, and he actually has a web comic called Rusty & Co. It is a D&D spoof comic. So Rusty is Rust Monster, and they have adventures, and it's hilarious, and he's been running it for years and years, and he's gotten some people like John Kovalek. I said, wow, what a great comic. So go ahead and check out Rusty & Co. Put it in their search engine. You'll pop up, and it is also at Rusty & Co. on Twitter. Thank you, Mike, for the logos.
Yes. Thank you so much. That was like, for the BGA side at least, that was the top of my list for like a year and a half. So you've saved me much getting that up.
Okay, so I think it's time to get into our review of Sword and Sorcery. How we do it was, we don't just talk about the game. We go on for at length, but we talk about it in the context of a comparison to Descent, because they're very similar games. And we ask that critical question, should you own both? If you own Descent, should you just chuck it and get Sword and Sorcery? All those questions will be there after the jump. Hey, everybody. I am joined now by a fellow 1-player guild member, which is really, really awesome because I wanted to do this Sword and Sorcery discussion, but Anthony will not touch this game with a 10-foot pole. So I put out the call in the 1-player guild, and yeah, I got a bite. So a fellow 1-player guild guy has joined me on the podcast right now. Say hi to Byron Campbell, aka Kittenhoarder. Hey, man.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on the show. I've been listening for a little while, and I really like what you're doing.
Hey, man, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. When you messaged me back and you were like, hey, I'm a regular listener to the show, I'm like, what? We have regular listeners? I thought we were just talking to empty air. Cool. So do you live up to the name Kittenhoarder?
Not really. We have 2 cats. So we have Jimmy and Harvey are our 2 cats, but I don't know. I thought the name sounded good, so not really a story behind it.
Okay. But there is a story behind your history as a, I guess, content creator, reviewer. You do have some content out there, so I'm going to give you a chance to give the people a little bit of promo before we get into Sword and Sorcery.
All right, sounds good. So there's really 2 places that you'd want to look for my content, and that would be I'm a senior writer at Miniature Market's Review Corner. So I was one of the first writers on there when they started up. Actually, it's been a couple of years. It seems like it was just yesterday. So I've been writing there for a couple of years. You can check out my reviews on Miniature Market Review Corner. The other place would be entropymag.org. And that's sort of interesting. It's sort of a literary community. So for people who are into books and literature and writing, but also to explore other interests. So I'm the editor there for the tabletop games section. So I do a monthly series of very long-winded reviews / session report / critical sort of discussion. But also I'm totally open to new content. So if anybody out there has any writing that they want to do that sort of explores the boundaries of narrative and games, feel free to send it in to me at byron@entropymag.org.
Y'all know that I love to have a lot of people on, whether it's designers or publishers or just you guys. So want to get as many people involved in the hobby as possible. And it sounds like this is, if you have a literary bent to your desires to create content, that it sounds like this is a good place to start.
Yep, absolutely.
Great. So let's get into it. Let us get into Sword and Sorcery. And the angle I wanted to do for this review, so this game is a dungeon crawler. We're not going to go into the big song and dance about what is a dungeon crawler, how this works, because there's a lot of them and they all kind of run the same. And it's in the details that everything kind of diverges. So, you have a bunch of heroes and you start with a little wooden sword and a dream. And you go through dungeons and you fight monsters and you get treasure and you level up and you chuck lots of dice and all that stuff. And then eventually you're going to go through different scenarios and you meet a big boss or a couple of big bosses. So it kind of like runs through a whole story arc. I have just described every dungeon crawler that has been released. So I wanted to take this game, though, and compare it directly to Descent, because as opposed to a lot of the other games, so like Gloomhaven has a card-based system and Too Many Bones has this kind of tactical map. So there's a lot that distinguishes it. This game and Descent are very, very similar. Go through tile-based movement, chucking dice, lots and lots of dice, leveling up, getting items, all that kind of stuff. So that's the angle that we're going to do. And we're going to ask a pretty critical question. If you want one of these dice chucking dungeon crawlers, which one should you get? So we're going to save our answer to that for the very end. So we're just going to go through item by item and break it down and see, compare the two. So the first is component quality. You get the box, big box, heavy. These games always have heavy boxes. Lots of minis. So what do you think about just comparing, you barely know anything about the game. You open the box, the things that you see. What do you think about the two games?
Well, I think either one is going to impress you with the component quality when you open up the box. The minis, I think, are really good looking in both of them. One advantage, well, they both have a lot of detail, but one advantage that I think Sword and Sorcery has in the minis department is we have several unique sculpts for each enemy type. So, like, for instance, your gremlins or your orcs or whatever have various different poses and different equipment that they might be wearing. And the red enemy type, which is like the lieutenants in Descent, have their own unique sculpt as well that makes them a little more intimidating. So that's a really cool detail in the minis. Both of them, I think, have nice art on the boards, very atmospheric, and I think nice art on the cards for both of them. Well, what do you think?
I guess going back to the sculpts, I think, and this will become a kind of theme as we run through a lot of this, I think Fantasy Flight made their stuff more for just a lot of content, so they went for quantity. So you get zombies, and all the zombies are the same sculpt, and you get whatever it is, 6, 7, 8, whatever comes in a base box. And you could just tell, okay, this is just the beginning. There's going to be a whole lot that comes down the road. So I don't know if they put as much into the original, the original Descent box, whether it's first edition or second edition, as Sword and Sorcery. Sword and Sorcery, there's going to be a lot of content to it too, but I don't know that it's going to be to the level of Descent, which very few things are. Fantasy Flight's a huge company. So I can kind of see that, you know, like we were saying before in Sword and Sorcery, like I remember we were playing with the Raiders. They're like the human bad guys. Like one of them holding a scimitar, one of them holding a bow or a crossbow or something like that. And that little detail is like really cool. And the minis in both games are color coded, at least for the bad guys. So it's nice to just kind of have a visual representation. They're very paintable. At least the heroes are very paintable. The bad guys, you might want to keep that color scheme if you up whatever you want. But for the good guys, both very paintable. I think in Sword and Sorcery that it's a little bit gnarlier, if that's a word.
Yeah.
You know, like the goblins more feral. The big trolls are like, you know, big and angry, and you can tell the musculature is pretty good. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of extra love went into the Sword and Sorcery minis, but that's not to say that Fantasy Flight minis are bad, and it also is to say that Fantasy Flight probably has a little bit more quantity intended. Yeah, I mean, I think that the Sword and Sorcery definitely has a distinct art style. I find the Descent stuff very generic, which is probably not, you know, it's old. It probably wasn't as generic back when it was, you know, first came out, but nowadays, you know, it kind of sticks out. I think Sword and Sorcery kind of takes it in a little bit of a different direction. It's not like they're not reinvented the wheel over here, but they put a little extra effort into the theme.
Yeah, I would say actually for me, I would almost go the opposite direction. I think that the Sword and Sorcery, the art style itself, like the art of the characters on the cards and in the storybook and stuff like that, seems a little more generic. Whereas Descent has that sort of cartoonish element to it almost. I don't know if it's just because you have like the drunken dwarf and the like halfling thief and whatever featured so prominently, but it gives me more of like a sort of a cartoonish feel, which I think is a little more fun. It's a little more lighthearted, but I think it gets me into the mood a little bit better.
Yeah, the Descent stuff reminded me of the Pathfinder art, and I'm not a huge fan of Pathfinder, so I'm just biased. To each their own. Okay, so this is actually something that you want to talk about a little bit before we got into the nitty gritty. Just overall game flow of Sword and Sorcery. You want to give us a sense of how that goes?
Well, I think that when I'm talking about overall game flow, one thing that I think is a really important distinction between the two games is how the story is presented to you. So if we're going to get into story, maybe it'd be a good time to talk about it at that point.
Yep, let's do it right now. Sure.
Okay, cool. So in Descent, if you're playing with the app, that's the way that the story is presented to you. And you'll get like a short video that sort of, narrates what's going to happen, like what sort of setup you have for the story. And then you get into the map setup, and it explains everything you have to do. And then usually, like every time you enter a new room, they'll give you like a little snippet of story along with like instructions for how to set up the room. And Sword and Sorcery does a very similar thing, but they have this book of secrets, which is actually a pretty thick book of like, it's almost like a sort of Tales of Arabian Nights kind of thing, where it says like go to entry 4.22 in the book, and you go to 4.22 and it'll tell you something that happens. I feel like in Sword and Sorcery, one of my pet peeves about games of this style is that the story interrupts the gameplay a little bit more than I'd like. Whereas in Descent, I think it's a little more dialed down, the story in general. It's mainly presented to you before and after the scenario, and they keep those interruptions to the minimum. Plus, having the app, I think, is a little more streamlined than flipping through a book. So how do you feel about that?
It's reminding me of like, I guess, cutscenes. And, like I'm walking through Final Fantasy, I beat something, I to cross some sort of threshold, and I get like a movie or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't mind it because I guess I'm used to that in games. Plus, like the way that the Book of Secrets runs, when you choose characters and everybody has a hero and they're all the heroes, it's warrior and wizard, pretty standard stuff. But you also choose their alignment, and the alignment is like lawful or chaotic or neutral. So the story kind of branches off, and it's not like huge, but there are different choices and you get different things depending on whether you're lawful or whether you're chaotic. So when you're going through Descent, it's like you said before, you kind of just go from beginning to end, and whatever story is in there is just kind of like, you hear a knock on the door or you hear a whisper in the wood, and then it moves on. Here, it's like it gives you something. You get a little bit of a different path. Maybe you help the trader as opposed to stabbing him in the face and taking his gold, and you get a different thing at the end. So I would agree with you that it's a little bit rough if it didn't do anything, but it does. You get a different thing. You get a different item. You get a different path opening up to you. So I guess I didn't mind so much.
Yeah, that's true. I think having the different alignments and different sort of moral paths is something that Descent doesn't have, and that's the strength of Sword and Sorcery. What I'm talking about is more of like sometimes you'll go like you have to set up these waypoints on the map, and then when you pass over a waypoint, it'll say like look at this part in the book, and you look in the part of the book, and it's just like a little bit of atmosphere. It's just like, oh, the trees have dark shadows. Like, why did I have to go through the process of setting up something on the map, digging out the book, flipping to the right page, and reading that just to get that? Like, they didn't really give me anything. So I wish they dialed it back a little bit and kept it more to just things that are essential to the flow of the game and the biggest narrative moments.
Yeah, I guess they went a little bit overboard on it. So like, at one point you open a waypoint and it's a trap. And it's like, well, you could have accomplished that with a door as opposed to making me look in the book or whatever it is. So you're getting into a little bit of like how the heroes move in and out. So let's get into some gameplay, at least from the heroes. And I think that's a draw for a lot of people. Like, what does my hero do? How does he feel awesome? How does he level up? How does he defeat evil and all that kind of stuff? So how'd you feel about that, how Sword and Sorcery handle that end of things? So
Sword and Sorcery, I think, does a pretty good job of giving your heroes increasing like ramps of power as you go through. And I think that's something that both Descent and Sword and Sorcery are sort of setting the bar for. I think before Descent 2nd Edition, there wasn't really anything that had that same, in a board game, that same level of both, increasing your skills and also being able to shop at like merchants and stuff like that, and all of that stuff. All of that in a game. And I think Sword and Sorcery does the exact same thing, which is very nice. Basically, the way that it's set up, you have these like gems that represent your heroes, and as you level up, you rotate these gems, and they tell you how many attacks you get every turn, how far you can move, and things like how many extra actions you get every turn. So as you level up, you not only get new skills, which is also stated on your gem how many new skills you can get, but also you can get to do more on your turn. And so that's a nice way that they sort of ramp things up as you go.
Yeah, and you do it like in the flow. So as soon as you get them, you can kind of decide that someone levels up. And like we just finished playing a game in my group where I think the wizard got caught in like a spawn point, and it like 3 goblins just kind of like woof, there you are, and the wizard's like ah. So then we kill one of them. It drops a soul shard. We ended up just giving the soul shards to the wizard. He leveled up, and he was able to like survive and do different stuff because he got like an extra action, whatever he got. And it was like, wow, that's really cool. Like that gives me more of a sense of like in World of Warcraft or in one of those the online games, you just boom, like you get that little shine and you level up. And that so I guess in a way like it kind of simulates more of a video game feel, where in Descent you don't level up on the way, right? You do all that stuff afterwards. Yeah. So I mean I guess that's to your taste. Like some people might find that leveling up in game too video gamey and too gimmicky. I loved it. I thought it was really cool.
No, I agree. I think that's a great thing about the heroes. Another really cool thing about the heroes is that you can get like killed basically, but you're never out of the game. So do you want to talk a little about the ghost soul thing?
Yeah, there's not too much to talk about. Like you die, but you become like you still take a turn, but all you could really do is move and like give a minor buff or something. And you get increased movement, so you want to go towards one of the little resurrection points. So it's like, this sucks being a ghost. I can't attack. I can't do nothing. But at least you're doing something. And at least it's like, okay, someone else is setting up for an attack. and they probably need the boost because you died and you're not contributing. So you can actually like kind of have a choice and choose and buff a person on the way to resurrecting yourself. So the lack of player elimination there is really good. I think in Descent you're just boned if you if you die, right?
Yeah, I think you get knocked out and then you have to spend a turn standing up, and I don't remember exactly how it works, but
so there isn't player elimination there, but as it, you know, it feels a little bit better to just kind of like move a bunch and buff a person as opposed to just standing. So
I think
that's just
when we talk more about story, I think we could talk about this too. But I think just thematically, it's very cool that it reminds me of the like the Soulsborne, like Dark Souls and Bloodborne type of games. That when you die, you resurrect as like your spirit form, and then you still move around and do things, and you have to find your way back to where you can resurrect. So that little thematic element, I think, really works for me.
In terms of the combat itself. And this is kind of what made me want to seek out, what people who have played both games and kind of talk about the differences, because the combat in Descent is grid based. So you're moving like, each tile will be like, a 4x4 grid, and you're kind of moving around the grid. In this game, it's basically zone based. So you can move 3 or 4 tiles per turn, which generates more, it lets you move forward faster. And rolling, and in this game you roll D10s and special D10s, and in Descent you're rolling special D6s. So we could talk about that difference there, but also that in terms of the tactical movement, how did you find the difference between the two?
Well, you're right that in Descent there's the spaces are smaller, so you have more spaces per tile basically, and they can only hold 1 mini, I think. Whereas in Sword and Sorcery, the spaces are designed to hold like a whole bunch of minis at a time. And that actually becomes part of the tactics. There's not as much tactical movement like positioning yourself for an attack. Line of sight isn't really that important, which is something that I actually like because I hate having to deal with line of sight in a game. Like, I just can't visualize it for some reason.
What, you don't have your ruler ready at hand to take care of stuff?
No. But the advantage of having this is there's this almost like mini area control thing that's going on with Sword and Sorcery, where if you can prevent the enemies from having more minis on the space than you do, then you can prevent them from having certain advantages. And if you can get like double the amount of minis in the space as the enemies, then you get like special advantages during combat. So it's really basic, like +1 to your hits and stuff like that. And also it prevents you from getting locked in to combat, because normally you can't escape combat if you're like in hand-to-hand combat with somebody. But if you get more minis on the space than the enemy does, you can escape combat and like go off and do your ranged attacks or do your healing or whatever. So I think that the replacement for the positioning in Descent is that it's got this added tactical element of, trying to group your characters. So I think it's a little nicer.
Yeah, I think like they're both doing different. They're both kind of serving different masters in a sense. So like, I think in Sword and Sorcery you have every incentive to kill every single thing on the board, because they all drop something. They all drop either experience or they drop money. So when you have these giant zones that you're just moving to, there's no avoiding the monsters. They all just kind of cluster and you deal with them. In Descent, if you're beating all the enemies, then you're doing it wrong. So it's usually a race where like, the necromancer is summoning something. You have to get to him before that, and the enemies are just kind of in the way. And you don't really get extra XP if you kill like the Pez dispenser of enemies that comes out. So you have to like run around. So like the grid-based movement kind of works for that. So you can just pick a path that avoids enemies. And like if you're the ranger or something with high movement, you can run. So, I guess I prefer the former. I prefer just waiting in there and just clubbing stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not that,
I think along the same lines, I mean, this could be maybe more on the scenarios, but I think it has to do with the gameplay for the good guys too. The scenario design, I think, may be a little more varied in Descent. But that was really in the Descent multiplayer version, though. I don't know how varied the scenarios are in the app. I've only seen some of them. It seems like that is more combat focused, whereas Sword and Sorcery has always been combat focused. I mean, that's the game hasn't gone through as many iterations as Descent has. So the scenarios are more straightforward, but I think the combat is way cooler. I think this getting into like the actual combat resolution with the dice, there's just a lot more going on in combat in Sword and Sorcery, because you've got, in Descent, you've got either you hit or you miss, and you might be, depending on what you rolled, you get like an extra hit or something like that. And then you can have like the lightning bolt abilities that trigger, special abilities you can activate. Whereas in Sword and Sorcery, there's something like 6 different icons that can show up on the dice, and they can all do different things depending on what your equipment is and what different skills you're using. So like sometimes you want to roll lightning bolts, sometimes you want to roll the little magic symbols, which is like a little star. Sometimes you want to roll the little Sword and Sorcery symbols for like a really powerful attack, but that's rare. I think it just shows up once on the D10. So I think there's a lot more sort of granularity and grittiness in the combat that makes it more interesting from turn to turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. In this game, like, you could stun people, you could knock them down, you could, push them away and push them into the tank and do whatever. So yeah, I definitely found that the whatchamacallit, the fights, the dice, having 10 sides as opposed to 6 sides, and it's not just a 10-sided dice with one face. There's like multiple faces on the dice. There's like a lightning bolt and a hit, or 2 lightning bolts, or whatever it is. Put a lot of thought and care into making the combat diverse, which could be a plus or minus for people, because maybe this is too complex. Maybe they want a simpler, just I'm going to chuck a bunch of D6s with some 1 or 2 special symbols, and that's enough for them. So as somebody who likes a little bit more out of their combat, this is a dice chucker. I think that's a good way to go, because at the end of the day, you are chucking dice every single turn. It's nice that the dice chucking itself is more interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the bad guys. We've been talking about the good guys enough. Let's give the bad guys some of their due. You had an interesting comment in the One Player Guild where you talked about monster AI and saying how, like, the Descent AI looks like it was competitive but taken into the cooperative mode, where Sword and Sorcery seems to feel more natural.
Yeah, I mean, in Descent, and I haven't played my copy for a while, because I got rid of my copy of Descent a little before they announced the app, so I've only really looked through the app. I haven't gotten to play with it, but I did play with the cooperative mode, which was pretty much what they turned into the app. And in that, and in the app, it's basically you've got your monster cards, which tell what like the monster stats are and stuff like that, and then the game will tell you how the monsters behave that turn. And there will be a list of like criteria, like this is what they'll do first if they can do it, and this is what they'll do next. And it reads almost like a flowchart, like maybe like a really simplified version of an AI for like a war game or something like that. It doesn't really feel natural or intuitive to activate the enemies, especially because you have to keep looking back and forth, like, okay, here's their stats over on this card, here's what they're doing in the app, and then I have to look at the board and see, are they capable of doing this action? No, they're not, so I'm going to go to the next thing. Whereas the Sword and Sorcery, everything, including like their weapons range, what their attacks are, and their behavior, is all condensed into one card. So it's actually a really interesting system. If anybody's played Galaxy Defenders, it's very similar to the system they used in that. If you haven't played Galaxy Defenders, it's all based on the range. So you basically look at the enemy and say, what's the range to the nearest hero? And then look at their card, and based on the range, you'll say, okay, at range 0, he's going to attack twice, or something like that. At range 1, he's going to move and then attack. Or at range 2, he's going to attack with this different attack, which is supposed to represent the ranged weapons. So the attacks, like the weapons themselves and the attacks, don't actually have a range. It's just implied by the AI rules. And it also, what I think is really cool about this system is that it allows you to learn the enemy's patterns, almost like you brought up video games earlier. It's almost like a video game, like learning a boss. You get to learn, like, okay, this enemy is really dangerous at range 2, so we got to get close range with this guy and crowd him out and prevent him from doing those long-range attacks. Or this enemy we don't want to get close to him. So we've got to like keep our distance and try and use ranged attacks against him. And there might be a mix of those types of enemies on the board. So I think it leads to a lot more interesting gameplay overall.
Like, so in Descent, it's the monsters are made for the Overlord. So that every monster has like 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different powers. And they don't take that away when you move to co-op or move to the app or whatever. They just say, if he's standing next to the tank, then this. If he's standing close to the right archer, says this. If he's 5 squares away, so it's like it could be a bunch of different entries. And the app runs through it for you, and they display it really clearly, but you still have to kind of run through everything.
Yeah.
Boo. Boo. No, don't love that, because you're doing that for every single monster or whatever, every turn and all that. And then there's the regulars, and then there's the elites, and the elites are always different than the regulars. Very involved. The app does take care of a lot, but it only tells you what to do. You still have to do it, and you still have to make decisions for it. And they have found a way in this game, like you were saying before, by just triggering on range. And usually monsters just have like 2 attacks, like either a ranged or a melee. And the melee is nasty depending on if they're surrounded by their friends. So that's pretty easy to see. So that's it. And it works, and it's challenging. You know, if your tactics aren't good, if your mage gets caught in a spawn point, in any game you're going to get hosed if you have bad dice luck. But you do still have to play smartly in order to get through it, because the AI is simple yet challenging, which is a really cool trick they pulled off. So I'm really happy about that. Mm-hmm. So the boss, I didn't want to spend too much time on the boss tactics, just to say that this game has like a threat system, which was very MMO. So one thing I hated about Descent, it's the thing that made me swear it off for like years and years. I went in there, I played a mage, and the Overlord said, "You know what, mage? You're going to die." And we put me in hallways, we put me in behind corners and line. We did all the stuff we were supposed to do, but there's no way for the warriors and the whatevers to kind of, if the Overlord wanted to do it, or if the app just decides it kind of wants to go that way, then you're host. There's nothing you could do. But they at least... in this system, they have this like threat system, at least for the mega bosses, where, you know, you could hit and you could generate threat, you know, so, and, you know, if other people hit it, they generate threat, but the tank has ways to generate more threat. So it feels very MMO-ish, but I appreciated that. And it's, I not that I love the system itself. I find it kind of fiddly because you have to kind of flip the token and everything, but at least they tried. And I think there's their heart is in the right place. And I think with more time and more design, they'll kind of get that smooth out a little bit. But I like the direction which that's going.
Yeah, totally. I think the master enemies, that's what they call it, the purple enemies that are the bosses, are really cool. I think miles above like the lieutenants and stuff like that you see in, or it's not the lieutenants. What are the like unique enemies that you see in Descent called? Do you remember?
Oh, I know it was regulars and elites. I forget what the big enemies are.
Yeah, maybe they are the lieutenants. But anyway, those are basically just an enemy with like a couple special abilities, whereas these bosses are like really epic boss fights. And like you said, there's that whole threat thing where you're trying to like draw the enemy's fire to yourself. But also these are all of them are double-sided, so you might face like a boss and have him like based on certain, like when he gets hit or something, he flips to the other side and his behavior changes. Or if there's various triggers for when they would flip, but it allows them to have changing behavior during the fight, which is a very, very cool thing. And there's only 2 of them in the like Act 1 of the campaign, which is what you get in the base box. But there's several others, and I think they get increasingly interesting as you go, which is what you would want.
So you brought up extra content, so let's talk about base game versus expansions versus what's available. So Sword and Sorcery is a Kickstarter, which Kickstarter is a dirty word when it comes to these games because, oh my God, what's exclusive? Mm-hmm. It turns out in Sword and Sorcery, there's not that much that's exclusive. I think in the original pledge, there was 1 hero. There was a lot of stuff that you can get, but you can get it afterwards. They're releasing it slowly, so you have I think you've kept track of how that all works, right, man?
I don't know exactly what you get in like what's available separately. I know that I know what's in the base game. I know what's coming in the expansions. And I think you're right. I think you can get a lot of it separately. But then again, Ares, who are the publisher for this, with Galaxy Defenders, there was a lot of stuff that was like not Kickstarter exclusive, but they're just now releasing it in retail, and it's been like 3 years or something like that. So I wouldn't count on being able to get it all immediately if you're not a Kickstarter backer, which is a shame.
Yeah. A lot of Kickstarter backers got this separate Act 2 expansion, which had like double the heroes, and double the it's basically a whole separate new game. I think there's enough game in the base box to tide you over. Like, it's basically one arc. And, I'm the person that plays a lot of different games. I'm not just going to sit there and play one game, unless it's Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven is like, okay, not even going to mention that game. That game is awesome. But I'm going to play this game only a couple times. I'll take it to my game group, and it is enough for me there. If you're like really in to these kind of games and you're just going for a Sword and Sorcery retail, you might have a bit of a rough time. So in Descent, it's all there. Like, the base box has, it basically has as much stuff as Sword and Sorcery has, but you can get it all, and you don't have to wait for it. And, at this point, if you're into these games, price might not be as much of an issue as with other IPs. But there's so much just at your fingertips for Descent. So if you don't want to wait for the Sword and Sorcery stuff, it might be to your advantage to go the Descent route. I don't know.
Yeah, I will say that Descent, one of the things that kept me from, really getting into it was that there's so much content available for what was originally a multiplayer game. So they try to use as much of it as possible in the cooperative and solo stuff, but it still feels like, okay, I'm paying like, $30 to $50 or whatever for an expansion, depending on the size of expansion you get. And like, I'm going to throw some of this stuff away. It just seems like a waste. So I think you're in a similar position no matter which one you choose. If you're just starting on one of them, if you've not already, bought into Descent, I think you're going to be in a similar position as you would be with Sword and Sorcery, as in terms of like, okay, you're going to have to buy a little more to get more of the content.
So we're going to move to just overall impressions. Like, so I think you kind of started to say at least, what you would recommend for people who are just getting into one or the other, but do you have any kind of concluding thoughts or opinions?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so here's my thought. Sword and Sorcery, I think, was designed as a cooperative game. It's going to feel smoother as a cooperative game. The combat is more interesting. And if you are going to get all of the extra stuff, I know for a fact all the Act 2 stuff is going to be available eventually, and the expansions and stuff are going to be available. There's a lot of content there, and it's going to, I think, satisfy you. If you have already bought into Descent, they are pretty similar, and I don't know. I mean, the app is pretty cool. I don't know if I could recommend throwing away your Descent stuff and getting Sword and Sorcery, and they're similar enough. I don't know if I would recommend owning both. Do you have an opinion on it?
That's exactly where I fall. So, like, Gloomhaven's a different beast. Too Many Bones is doing something very different. Shadows of Brimstone has, like, a different take on theme, and there's some different mechanics going on. So if you're, like, a collector of this stuff, there's definitely room for the different titles, and, because they all kind of contribute something different. But Sword and Sorcery and Descent, like you were saying before, like, they're very similar, even down to the tiles. Like, you take the tiles out, they're both jigsaw tiles. In fact, you could probably interchange.
Yeah.
Right? Like 17A from the Descent box and 17A from the Sword and Sorcery box is like, okay, fine. I'm in a forest and not a tomb or something. Great. So if you're hardcore into Descent, I wouldn't kind of give this. I mean, play it, obviously, and if you like the more combat, like the richer, I think it has a more robust combat system in Sword and Sorcery, then maybe think about making a switch. But if you're already in on the Descent train, then, just have fun. And so, but, I still think that, if you're just kind of coming in brand new, looking at both, then you kind of have to decide what kind of game you want. If you want a richer combat experience, then definitely Sword and Sorcery. And you get a lot of else too. You got, like we were talking about before, you get some really gnarly minis, really good looking minis. You're going to get a lot of content eventually. There is app-based support. So that, there's not a lot of gameplay stuff in the app. You get like flavor, and you get some, I think the app has like some of the storybook, the Book of Secret stuff. So you do get some online integration there too, just not as much as Descent. So, you're getting a lot for Sword and Sorcery. If you're coming in fresh, you might want to give Sword and Sorcery a look.
Yeah, and I would add that if you want to turn into a werewolf or a vampire, I don't think Descent does that, but Sword and Sorcery will let you do that. So that might be a tipping point for some people.
Spoilers, that's not in the base. Oh, thank you so much, man. It was really cool to be able to bounce stuff back and forth with a live person. Just one more time, tell people where they can contact you.
Right. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. You can contact me at byron@entropymag.org, or, send me a geek mail at kittenhoarder on Board Game Geek.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.
All right. And that is our full review of Sword and Sorcery versus Descent. Thanks, Jason and Byron Campbell, a.k.a. Kitten Hoarder, for taking that on while I was out of town.
Yeah, that was really, really fun. Thank you, Brian.
All right, guys. So that's everything for this episode. Once again, make sure you check out the brand new website at boardgamersanonymous.com. You can also type in everynightisgamenight.com, and it'll take you directly to that channel. And make sure you enter the contest. You can find it on the Twitter feed, BGA Podcast or ENGN_podcast, on Facebook, the Board Gamers Anonymous page, on the website, in the show notes for this episode. Don't email me and say you couldn't find it. It's everywhere. So make sure you enter that contest. You have about a week left, so you can get about 15 entries in and get your chance to win $50. But that's going to go ahead and be everything for this week. So until next time, go ahead and grab a solo game off the shelf, and let's make every night game night.
Late, everybody.